So you've got our panelists' full bios. Just to try and recoup a bit of time, I'll skip through, but just try and capture a couple of salient highlights for each. To my left, Dr. Liz Buchanan is a senior fellow with the Institute, and she is also a visiting fellow at the US Alliance Studies Center with the national interest in Washington, DC, so is well versed in Alliance and AUKUS issues, and previously was the head of research for the Royal Australian Navy at their Sea Power Centre, the Navy's think tank here in Canberra. Sean Singleton is ex-US Air Force, but currently serves as the managing principal of Oglethorpe Capital and as independent director of WAFED Bank. Sean is also a US venture partner for Beaton Zone. And to our left, Jennifer Parker, also formerly of ASPI. Jen, if I can say that. Nice to welcome you back to the Institute, but is currently the founder of Barrier Strategic Advisory and is also an expert associate at the National Security College with the Australian National University and is a very regular commentator on maritime affairs here in Australia. And last but not least, she served 20 years in the Navy. So there's always an AUKUS session, and this is no exception, but I'll also just ask as a riding instruction to our three panelists if whatever you can do in your comments to relate things back to our given theme of preparedness and resilience, which I'm sure you'll have no difficulty in doing. AUKUS has never really been removed from angst from day one, and I think that's an on-running part of the debate, which is, I think, among the three countries, the liveliest in Australia. I can say that for sure. But it does strike me that there is a shift in tone in the debate, that the critics of AUKUS have felt empowered to up their game somewhat in the last year. The last panel was not exactly unconnected to the theme of confidence in AUKUS either, given the importance of the United States as the largest of the three partners. My job as moderator is to ask the questions, but my accent, you'll probably have noticed, is a stand-in for the absence of a British member of the panel. AUKUS is a three-way partnership, as I sometimes like to write and remind people. Without further ado, we'll go straight to Liz. I'll just do a question for each of the panelists once or twice, and then we'll open it up to question and answer to the floor. So again, please prepare your questions in advance. Liz, let's start with a kind of general theme. Do you think the strategic vision of AUKUS has become clearer since its announcement back in September of 2021?
Best question. First of all, thank you to Gay and Justin for the invitation to be here. And I just wanted to highlight that we're almost at the end of the day and we've only had 3 references to agility. So I'm really, really happy. So essentially, no, yes, and maybe are my answers about the vision. Essentially, we have a capability partnership that Australia has more or less fashioned into a strategy. And I think it takes up, AUKUS itself takes up an inordinate amount of space in our activities already that are underway, but also that are set to be underway, and I think that's a problem. Vision-wise, I think a key problem is that we have a different vision across all 3 parties, and I think it's an issue. So for the US and the UK, increasingly, it is a partnership. But for the US, I think we've now made it the partnership, if not the amount of resources we've assigned to it, but in terms of just our general discourse. I don't think that the vision itself, so to enhance the security and stability of the Indo-Pacific through defence cooperation, really matches the problem set that we're told, which is we've got imminent threats and the most challenging strategic environment since World War II. So having a solution, or the hallmark of the solution coming in 2 decades, to me kind of seems odd. Also, the vision, I think, is problematic because we seem to have, at least in Pillar 1, I'm much more happy and upbeat about Pillar 2, don't worry. But Pillar 1 is such a one-shot solution that comes in a few decades' time or might not come at all. And I think that's a problem. So I think we really do need to return to this intent. Why are we chasing after a nuclear-powered submarine capability for Australia, and have some hard conversations about how fit for purpose this is with a rapidly changing environment. We have limited resources, and I think we need to act accordingly. But I do think the vision for AUKUS can be achieved. I just think it is without Pillar 1, and I'm keen to have that debate I'm sure we'll have. I think we can secure and stabilise the Indo-Pacific in many other ways, and SSNs are not going to be, as I said, the single shot solution for us. But that's not to say I don't like SSNs. If I could have an SSN, I would. I'm very partial to them. And don't worry, I'm not going to break out in dance. But I do think SSNs are part of our answer for what we're trying to do with AUKUS, and we need to be focused more on the hosting and the sustaining, the maintaining of that capability. So I think we need a bit of strategic free riding. I think we shouldn't be afraid to do that with our partners. I think we should make it public. When we have a French SSN in our region, we should up the engagement there. We should go sub-rotational forced west and a sub-rotational forced east, so put that on steroids. So be smarter, and yeah, strategic free ride off this uplift that we can take from our partnered and allied SSNs in the region. Of course, the whole point of the question was, is the vision clearer? Yes, no, maybe, because I don't think the vision matters at all. I mean, in a few decades' time, with the churn of politics and a new person in your decision-making chair, we might have all, forgotten what the vision was. Goalposts would have changed. And something that is deemed adequate will be fashioned as success.
Okay, thank you. I think fair to say you're in the skeptic side of the camp.
Yet optimistic.
I'm a card-carrying member, and I think we should be.
I don't know how strategic free riding will go down in Washington under current management, but maybe we'll return to that later on. I think you touched on a couple of other salient themes, Liz. One, the idea that AUKUS is not necessarily the solution, but could be part of the solution, including Pillar 1. The second one, as you hinted at, the opportunity cost, particularly as we're looking at defence in a holistic sense in this conference. It's not just about AUKUS as a freestanding initiative, it's about what AUKUS has also cost in terms of not being able to achieve the other elements of defence modernisation. Sean, turning to you, we've already kind of naturally segued to this. Let's go back to Pillar 1, the submarine optimal pathway component. Can you identify what are the key operational and political hurdles, and anything you can say from your own experience about how industry is leaning in?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and also, Justin, Euan, thank you for being back at another ASPI conference. It's wonderful to be back in Australia. This is my third consecutive year being in your wonderful country, so thank you for the gracious hospitality. Picking up on what Liz just wonderfully articulated, I am very optimistic with regards to AUKUS, both Pillars 1 and Pillar 2. There's a lot of growing pains. I mean, just to be honest, we're coming up on our 4th birthday with regards to the strategic engagement, and the 3 signatories to the engagements are no longer the heads of government. And so I think that you lose a lot in the way of continuity in that regard. Which gets into, I think, in order for this to actually be successful moving forward, there are 3 things that need to really sort of happen, and we need to sort of recognize that. Is that given that lack of continuity in leadership, we all believe in democracies and democracies change, embracing the commercial sector and realizing that that's probably going to have greater continuity than what we're going to have in our government. So how can we go ahead and further incentivize the commercial sector to come on in and do more of that heavy lifting? Number 2, get away from requirements and focus in on outcomes. I think if we can actually sort of reinforce the vision of like what success looks like and works backwards from there, I think that'll go a long way, because what we all do in our respective governments is to sort of stare at our shoes and talk about requirements, ad nauseum, and then when we realize that technological change is about and we can then harness that. We go ahead and change the requirement again over and over and over again. And an extension of that is to embrace uncertainty, which is point number 3. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Anduril, the company, Palmer Luckey and the team, but Palmer was on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about their go-to-market approach. And if you know anything about Anduril, or if you don't, they start with everything from a software-first perspective, and then they design the form factor to optimize towards that mission set. I think if we could really sort of embrace more of that Anduril view of things as it relates to Pillar 1, I think we can go ahead and make some really awesome things happen. So that's the framework and the context. As far as what I'm seeing on the ground in the United States, and I slightly take issue with some of the commentary earlier, the panel before here, as far as the president's budget goes, this is the actual first budget that the president will be submitting over these next couple of weeks that actually truly is his. So the FY26 budget is his. The FY25 budget was largely a President Biden budget. The $150 billion reconciliation wedge does get you to $1 trillion. When you go through that $150 billion reconciliation wedge, there's $34 billion allocated to that for shipbuilding. There is a huge focus across many of the shipbuilding states in the United States that we really need to get this right. And we want to do right by you, we want to do right by the United Kingdom, so much so that we actually have a not-for-profit organization called the Blue Forge Alliance, if you're familiar with that. Interestingly enough, they're based in the middle of Texas with no water around it, but they are responsible for actually making sure that we have a workforce development component and the industry collaboration and partnership in order to make Pillar 1 a reality. So they want to do 1 Columbia class, 2 Virginia class as quickly as we possibly can in perpetuity to make sure that we have the craft that's there. So the last thing that I will just say on this specific point, what seems to be working really well, and this is more from a Pillar 2, being able to leverage some of those lessons learned into Pillar 1, is that when you look at Australian firms like Hypersonics and some of the others out there that are working with organizations like the Defense Innovation Unit, those are Pillar 2 capabilities that are allowing our 2 nation states, Australia and the US, to actually go ahead and make some great things happen. I would look at those as being sort of the singles and doubles engagements to actually go more for the home runs and the grand slams as it relates to Pillar 1, because if we're able to go ahead and harness that capability in the way that we've gone to market repeatedly together, I think it'll make Pillar 1 a lot easier to go ahead and implement.
Thank you. We'll come back to Pillar 2 a little bit later. As I mentioned, we don't have a UK representative, but I thought in that context it's worth underlining that yesterday there was an official unveiling of the new UK government. And Sean, your point is very well taken about the lack of continuity. You've got none of the 3 principals left in power. So there are obvious questions about the commitment of successors, particularly if it's of an opposing party, which then comes in. But the Labour government, among its recommendations, did include a commitment to build up to 12 new nuclear submarines to the AUKUS SSN spec, and that's up from, I think, 7 at the moment. So there is some good news also, I think, from the UK side about the industrial commitment behind that, which will also generate economies of scale, bring down the production time. I say that because there is a particular angst that I detect in Australian audiences about UK defence industrial capacity, and I don't want to stray from the boundaries of being a moderator, but anything the panelists have to say on that would also be interesting. Jen, let's turn to you. You're no stranger to commenting on AUKUS. I thought maybe we'd just throw to you and expand in the international context. One of the questions that comes up as a hardy perennial around AUKUS is the question of partnership and enlargement. Should AUKUS expand to include other countries or form the basis of a broader security architecture in the Indo-Pacific?
Look, thanks so much for the question, Euan, and thank you very much to ASPI for having me here and to all the people that brought this conference together. In fact, I was in South Korea last week, and a number of South Korean naval officers actually thought Japan was a member of AUKUS. And I think there is quite a misconception across the region about who is and who is not part of AUKUS, although I think the answer is in the name predominantly. But before I touch on that, I do just want to touch on a couple of things that were mentioned on this panel. If you read Australian press and you follow the AUKUS debate, you would know that I'm quite supportive of Australia's acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines. And I kind of just want to articulate why, and probably just kind of debate some of the points about single shot, not an answer for a capability for the next 2 decades, etc. I think the first thing we need to think about is the gravity of saying that we are in our most significant strategic circumstances since World War II. We are openly talking about the chances of conflict in our region. I think sometimes in this country, we talk about that too flippantly, like it's a far off thing. Yeah, we're talking about it, we're cool, we're talking about going to war. We don't actually realise what that means. That means a catastrophic conflict in this region, and it means the death of thousands, if not millions, of Australian women and men, potentially. And so I think we need to anchor our thinking and our recommendations in that and what that means. Now, the decision to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, I think I've said openly and publicly, if I was the Prime Minister, I'm not, maybe one day. If I was the Chief of Navy, I'm not, maybe one day. But I wouldn't have necessarily made that decision. But we do need to accept in this country that that decision is made, and we are on that path. Failing a catastrophic failure of that pathway, it would not be in our interest to renege on that for a whole bunch of reasons. Why are we acquiring nuclear-powered submarines? We are an island nation, first and foremost. And it was funny, I don't watch the ABC that much. Sorry, if there's an ABC reporter in here, please call me. But I don't watch the ABC that much, but there's this ABC skit show where they make fun of what's been in the news in the last week. And my friend texted me, they're like, oh my God, you made this show. And I'm like, what happened? And they said, they made fun of you because you said we're an island nation. And they were like, duh, we're an island nation. But I think we forget that when we think about our strategy, right? We see things like the Echidna strategy. Albert Palazzo has something coming out pretty similar to the Echidna strategy saying, all we need to do is protect Australia's territory. That's fundamentally untrue. We need to protect Australia's vital interests. And our vital interests are many and varied, but some of those include the maritime domain. As a sovereign nation, it is not for us to delegate that responsibility to an alliance. We are responsible for protecting our vital interests. The idea of saying, hey, US, France, UK, you come and protect us, that is not what Australia is about when it comes to our maritime domain. So we do need the capability to do that. Now, are nuclear submarines the only way to do that? No, they're not the only way. We are investing in other capabilities, but they are incredibly important for Australia. This is not a new debate. It's a debate that goes to the 60s. It just didn't have the political will until now and the concern of China. So I just want to kind of highlight that because I think we just underestimate at times the gravity of what we're really talking about when we think about this country potentially going to war and the capabilities we need to protect our vital interests, which is not just our territory. Now, to your actual question though, Euan, do I think we should expand AUKUS? No, I don't. Now, I guess I am biased. My last job when I was in defence, I was in the Combined Maritime Forces in Bahrain, which is it's now a 48-nation coalition. It was a 36-nation coalition. It started with 12 countries, and it was about maritime counter-terrorism, expanded into counter-narcotics, and expanded into counter-piracy. There is this view that once you get a grouping, whether it's the Quad, the Squad, AUKUS, you name it, that you need to rapidly expand it. The experience of the Combined Maritime Forces, granted that's operational, not strategic or industrial, is the more rapidly you expand things to other countries, the less effective they are. And when you think about what does Australia need to get out of AUKUS, Australia needs submarines to be delivered. We are fast running out of time. We may get onto this in terms of the legs of the Collins. They probably will not last. They certainly will not last to the 40s, to be honest. You don't need to be an engineer to say that. So we need to make AUKUS work. As I said at the start of my point, that decision has been made. And barring a catastrophic failure of that timeline, we need to work as a country to make that happen. Expanding it to other countries, although we're really talking about AUKUS Pillar 2, which is a collaboration on technical capability, is a distraction for Australia from the main game. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think we should be collaborating with other countries on the key elements of AUKUS Pillar 2. Of course we should, and we already are. But I think that bringing in Japan or South Korea or Canada or New Zealand is distracting the focus. But there are many ways that we can bring them into collaboration on specific aspects of that technology, of course, and we should, and we would benefit from that greatly. Observer status in certain working groups, of course. And we do need to be cognizant in the design of AUKUS Pillar 2 as we sort out our export controls, we do with our security challenges, that we don't build up barriers that prohibit collaboration with countries such as Canada, New Zealand, Japan, etc., that are critical to that. But bringing them into the AUKUS club, I think for Australia right now would serve as a distraction to our main game.
You mentioned the gravity of the situation as measured by the most concerning situation since Second World War, which is the official frame of reference that the government uses. A historical note I can't help but make, having written a piece along those lines, it's not the only time Australia has faced a dearth of submarine capability. Similar decisions were made in the 1920s and 30s, which led to Australia fighting the entire Second World War without a submarine in service. And the American and British submarines were based out of Western Australia throughout that period. It's,
but we shouldn't plan our strategy around that.
if you
That's
get,
a failure of capability.
you get lucky once, but that's not a basis for strategy. Indeed. Liz, I'm going to throw this back to you, having sort of painted you in the corner as a skeptic. See how you respond to this question. What are the strongest critiques of AUKUS in your view? But given the central importance of strategic communications, which seems to be another area where AUKUS is often debated, how should the AUKUS partners realistically counter some of the public negativity which may be less deserved?
Obviously, communication's so critical, and it's lapsed completely across the board. And it's not just an AUKUS issue. And it was a key point that I think was Joe gone. He made a really good point about the need to be better communicating the strategic situation. Yes, but it's also about who we're communicating it to. Like if I look around this room, yeah, maybe a handful of millennials, less than a handful of Gen Z. So we're not even talking to the people that are going to be, delivering or working in some of these capabilities, whose shoulders they fall on. And that's not to say that the younger generations aren't all for spending more in defence. I am, most of my friends are. It's just about, I guess, making that political case much more accessible. And it's an echo chamber if we allow it to be an echo chamber. We have one here today. But in terms of critiques, we could spend the next 26 minutes if you wanted to. Jen and I would have far too much fun. It would be criminal. But I think the strongest one sits around political will at both the domestic and the international level. So the will of all three nations involved love democracy. It's a problem. It's hard. It's challenging, just the way in which it interacts with external stimuli and internal stimuli. So we've got really difficult beasts to tame in that sense. I think we've got obviously three different political futures, and Corey, where is Corey, gave a masterclass again on just the reality of what we're dealing with at the moment in, again, the most complex strategic environment since World War II. I probably don't get it right completely, but you know the way it goes. So couple these different political systems that we need to navigate across waging sort of relative power declines here in the US, economic issues. I think Australia's 400% of our household debt is, we're borrowed at least 400% of our household debts. We're in dire straits, not to mention the US either. Our demographic health, we've got issues there. So the idea that we're staying the course on an agreement that's meant to deliver something that is so critical to the here and now today, I think is really risky. But, these are the known unknowns of any liberal democracy. Really difficult to control, but we'd prefer to get there. I'll hurry up. Advice was the next part of your question. Of what I would give to government. I'm going to be super, super boring here and shock Justin, but I think we need to go back to the basics. So the bottom line things, I don't think we need to be talking about X% of GDP on defence spending. It's not helpful. If we went to 7% and had 100,000 more people in defence, I don't know if we'd deliver anything. For me, it's in the project space and in the process we have issues. So I think that our risk treatment in our processes throughout defence in the project space is our biggest problem. So any risk hierarchy is going to tell us you're going to control your risk. The least effective way to do it is through policies and strategies and training and education. Why is that the first thing we're doing right now? We should be at the most effective point, elimination and substitution for all major projects.
Okay, great. I'm going to channel my inner Admiral Meade and impose some draconian management efficiency on our remaining panelists. So 1 minute each for the remaining questions to you. Sean, first. Should AUKUS, what are the main bureaucratic or intelligence sharing bottlenecks to AUKUS currently, and how are they being addressed?
Yeah, so just to pick up on what Liz just wonderfully articulated, I'm a big fan of what you're putting down.
Thank you.
No, one of the biggest bureaucratic headaches is that whatever we do in the US, there's still the thought that we need to actually have you go through an ITAR or some kind of review of various things. Well, the whole point of signing an AUKUS agreement is to go ahead and reduce those barriers. And if we're willing to share with you nuclear submarine capability, everything in Pillar 2 should be like a subset of that. Yep. And so I think that there's a growing awareness of that. And I think, again, I come back down to where the commercial sector is driving this conversation, right? So when you look at the top 6 market cap companies that are headquartered in the United States, that's NVIDIA all the way through to Amazon, their combined market caps are almost $16 trillion, right? They're going to be doing so many things that affect and impact Pillar 2. We should go ahead and figure out ways to incentivize them to do that. And guess what? The government is not big enough, all of our respective governments, to actually persuade them to do one thing or the other. The power that we have is to bring use cases that are relevant to them in their commercial markets and to be able to go ahead and have them solve the priority problems that we have that are very analogous to the commercial segment.
Do we have a signature project on Pillar 2 yet? Is that something that we're missing in the benchmark of success or failure?
I think we have the mitochondrial DNA that's starting to form into a fully formed being, and that's your partnership that happens to be between ASCA and DIU. Right, and so I had the opportunity of meeting Professor Emily Hilder when she first came into that role. I was supposed to meet with Major General Meggitt. That actual conversation is going on right now, but hopefully I'll have a chance to sync up with them. But I think between that union and those organizations, if we can collectively come to it with priority problems and go through the DIU process of being able to solve those priority problems, we can unlock a tremendous amount of value. DIU is the only organization across all of the Department of Defense that can have a conversation with the Jamie Dimon on Wall Street, a Mark Andreessen in Silicon Valley, and a Jim Taiclet, CEO of Lockheed Martin. It's the only one that has that credibility. So they got a $2 billion plus up in this reconciliation bill. Let's go ahead and load up the dance card and go and do some great things. That was less than a minute.
Thank you.
I like what you're putting down.
Jen, just to round out the initial phase of question and answer, and I don't want to take more time for the questions from the floor. Brief answer, if you can. What does success for AUKUS look like in 2030, given that the timelines for delivery, most of AUKUS capabilities are significantly further ahead from that?
So by brief, you mean I've got 20 minutes remaining. All right, look, I guess, I challenge the view that AUKUS itself looks like a solution in 2 decades. I think that's being liberal with the optimal pathway. By 2030, if we are on the optimal pathway, and I think, we do need to acknowledge there is risk. Of course there is risk, right? The question is not, is there risk? The question is the risk currently being treated? And I would say that a lot of that risk that you can treat, you can't necessarily treat a new US president, but I think it is. And so I do think that by 2030, we are going to see submarine rotation force west. Now, what that looks like, obviously, some degree of a US submarine squadron operating out of Fleet Base West. There is a lot of preparation to get there. Now, I know some industry might roll their eyes and say, but the infrastructure issue, some of that can be mitigated if we're not on track for that. Whether we'll see a UK submarine, I think that I'm quite sceptical about that element, to be honest. I do think we will hopefully have progressed a long way to convincing the Australian public, but also the US in preparation for that. By 2030, we are 15 months prior to the US president at the time, whoever that may be, making the final decision to sell us the first Virginia-class submarine. I think hopefully we are further along the track in terms of convincing not only the Australian public, but the US public why this is in their interests. And this is, if I was to say, to Liz's point, and I completely agree, the public relations campaign has been ineffective. We have seen a huge upturn of people being quite anti-AUKUS, which, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but a lot of it isn't necessarily fact-based, it's sentiment-based, because you're seeing that in the newspapers every day. I think we're not articulating well what the US is getting out of this and how valuable Australia is. And so hopefully we've continued that conversation. I think there's a real question about how many Collins-class submarines we are effectively operating in 2030. I don't think there's anything that the current government can do about that right now. It is a fact. And to the point about the AUKUS being in 2 decades' time, we need to focus on now. The reason we got to now with the atrophying of the Royal Australian Navy and other capabilities is because we didn't focus on the future. We saw that we needed decisions made about the Anzac class. We saw we needed decisions made about submarines, and we didn't make those decisions. So we need to be able to walk and chew gum. We need to be able to address the force in being, but also address the future force. So I think hopefully that's where we'll be in 2030. Some positive things there. Now, I haven't touched on Pillar 2.
Briefly, please.
Briefly, look, I think that is an area that requires a significant amount of focus. I think we have potentially achieved some things. It's hard to say in the public domain. Where we'll be on 2030 on that really depends on what focus it gets right now. And I think if I can commend to you some reading on that, Peter Dean and Alice Nason from United States Study Centre had a great piece in The War on the Rocks that really says we either need to abandon it or really focus on it, which includes resourcing it, because it currently isn't. So hopefully in 2030 we're in a better place on that, but I'm sceptical. That was only 3 minutes.
All right, let's throw things open to the floor. If you could just, particularly for the people on the far ends, I'm aware that it's not easiest to see you from here, but I don't want to exclude questions, so if our mic runners could bear that in mind, please. Questions and answer, please identify yourself, restrict yourself to one question, please. See a hand raised over there.
Hi, David Waterhouse, Hypersonics, mainly focused on Pillar 2. But I'd like to get your thoughts on the ScoMo plug for AUKUS Pillar 3, and if you think it's relevant or a way of getting some traction.
Who would like to take that?
I'm happy to offer a comment, and then I'm sure Sean will have some comments on that, I would suspect. Look, to my point about not creating a distraction, I think it was unhelpful. Space is arguably, depending on which Osmin statement you read, an element of AUKUS Pillar 2. Creating a third pillar just creates more distractions from the main game. You've got to remember too, of course, former Prime Minister Morrison has key equities in saying that, given his current job. So I really don't think it's a serious consideration.
I agree. I think we should try to keep this ring fenced in as much as we possibly can, piggybacking off of your conversation. As far as the nation states, government doesn't need to own this whole entire process. Let's go ahead and have things naturally sort of percolate to the top. As you well know, in Silicon Valley, you don't expand before you actually have pioneered your minimal viable product. Let's get pillars 1 and 2 right first before we do any kind of nation state expansion or any other kind of mission creep.
Liz, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a dissent. I'd say it should be the new pillar 2 and move pillar 2 up to pillar 1 in terms of prioritisation. The fact that we're debating whether or not space should be, if there should be a file under our space capabilities, wild to me.
Or a rocket.
A rocket. There you go.
Okay, next question, please. Anyone from that side of the room? Particularly if there are any women who would like to ask questions.
Thanks very much. Devon Whittle from Global Shield Australia. Just have a question about autonomy and artificial intelligence cooperation under Pillar 2. I'd be interested in your views on whether changes in administration's approach to AI policy in the US or divergences between the US, Australia and the UK on governance and AI safety issues might be an obstacle or a potential opportunity for harmonisation through Pillar 2. Thanks.
That's a pretty technical question. Sean, I might throw it to you in the first instance.
Oh, I appreciate this and thank you. And so just getting back to the whole Silicon Valley conversation, right? So I think we all know that the origins of Silicon Valley go back down to the nuclear and the space programs, right? And then Department of Defense basically in the late 80s left this treasure trove of intellectual property behind on the cutting room floor. And as a result, we now have the iPhone and all of these other great technological innovations that have taken place. When you look at the traitorous 8 that left Shockley and then created Fairchild Semiconductor, just about every company that exists in Silicon Valley has a track back to that traitorous 8. I think we actually have the new traitorous 8, which happens to be the PayPal mafia, right? So when you look at the multi-billion-dollar unicorns that are sort of the new DoD economy, that's Palantir, Anduril, Shield AI, and a host of others, they all have a tie to some degree with the PayPal mafia. I am very confident and comfortable with those folks being in charge of a large swath of the technical maturation of that capability. And the fact that through folks like Steve Feinberg, who's the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and some of the other folks that they brought in on the DOGE team specifically that have ties to that PayPal mafia, that we have a high degree of probability of getting it right, especially leveraging artificial intelligence for where we probably need it the most, which is in the back office administration of governments. And so I think moving forward, you're going to see a lot of great capability that's being able to be paid for because of the savings that we get from the back end. And as it relates to the autonomy piece, I mean, I think going back to that Palmer Luckey 60 Minutes interview, I think he puts it out there very emphatically that we've already embraced autonomous systems in the battle space. And we, as three democracies, from an AUKUS perspective, might have our druthers. Yet I don't think the PRC operates under the same conditions that we do, and we'll have to sort of rise to that level depending on if there is a conflict somewhere in the South China Sea.
Great. Would anyone from that side like to ask a question? Don't see any hands currently. My boss in the front row, Justin Bassey.
Thanks, Euan, and great panel. I love the different perspectives. On why AUKUS, including both the capability side and the communication side, AUKUS only exists because of China. There's no other reason. It's only because of China. So isn't the reason that Australia needs AUKUS the same reason that the US and UK needs AUKUS to compete with China, whether it's with their submarines or the technologies in Pillar 2?
I think I'll take that first. Good question. I think it's so much more basic in terms of the why and the weird and wonderful mind of Washington. And the reasoning, it jumped out to me last night when I was reading the old testimony of John No, and he just has been nominated as the ASD for Indo-Pacific under Colby. And he literally says, when he talks about the Indo-Pacific and the role of all of the different partners in the region, this is the person that's going to be, crafting a lot of what comes in the next year or so out of the Department of Defence. He mentioned that Australia, he'd mentioned Japan, South Korea as partners. We weren't referenced as a partner. We were referenced as a logistics hub. So, I mean, when someone tells you what they think of you or what they want to do, just take it for face value. And I'm not making a judgment there on whether that's bad or good. How are the ways in which, with our limited resources, and we don't have the same level of agency in this discussion that the other partners do, how can we make the best of it? How can we really kind of, I won't say strategic free ride again, but weaponize our position as a logistics hub in the AUKUS discussion?
Jen.
Yeah, look, I'll offer a couple of comments on that. I think the first thing, you go back to first principles when you design a strategy. You design a strategy to protect your vital interests. Vital interests that you can't protect yourself, you rely on alliances and partnerships. That's how you design a strategy. You don't start by designing a strategy saying, we're going to be a vessel for someone else. And Australia should never think that way. We can't think that way now. We can't think that way 50 years ago. And certainly when we talk about the uncertainty of potential decisions in the US administration, then we really need to double down on the view that you design a strategy around protecting your vital interests. So the whole idea of us being a logistics hub for another country is, particularly for Australia, not an effective strategy in any way, shape or form. Now, when we think about the why for AUKUS, look, Justin, I would actually probably disagree with you. I don't think the why for AUKUS is a singular why. I think certainly what got it over the line is the concern about China's behaviour in the region and how that might impact Australia's national interests, absolutely. But I think the why is complex. I don't think the UK agreed to AUKUS because of China. I think the UK agreed to AUKUS because they need to protect their nuclear deterrent, which is how the UK remains a global power. To do that, they need nuclear attack submarines. To be able to afford that at the scale, then it helps to get in with Australia on that. I think the US saw it as a way of messaging China, absolutely. Australia, look, I know there's some people in the room who probably were in the room when this was made and might be like, Jen, you're completely off the mark, that's fine. I think for Australia it's complex. I think Australia is of course concerned about China, but the nuclear submarine debate has gone on for a long time in Australia. What it has lacked is the political will to want to invest in it, understandably. And what probably got the political will over the line is China. But for Australia, fundamentally, and this needs to be the key thing that we pass to our region who are uncomfortable about AUKUS, for Australia, it's about geography and the practicality of geography and how you protect our maritime domain. And that should be our number one messaging point.
If I can, Justin, I think part of the problem with AUKUS is it a cow or is it a horse? It was right from the beginning, whether it was in some people's minds simply a capability development initiative, to others it was a grand strategic bargain, to others it was a deterrent initiative. The fact that the identity itself is still in question, I think, throws back to that issue about clear strategic communications.
I think the question though always has to be asked, why did the US do it? The US didn't do it because Australia
I agree.
They did it because they assessed that they couldn't take on China. So that's why the US.
That, and then also too, having pre-positioned resources under a friendly banner and flag made a lot of sense, right? So I had the opportunity of just being in Darwin as of yesterday, and I had a chance to go and look at the wonderful, notices and placards out there of what transpired in February of 1942, right? My concern is that we're going down a path that we collectively had from December into February of that following year in 1942 of sort of being willfully blind to the geopolitical situation in the world. And getting back to resilience, that's the reason why the people that have the vested interest in this, yes, our governments, no question about it, yet Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 5 companies that want to make sure that the economic interests are preserved, and the best way of doing that is being able to go ahead and shape the Department of Defenses of the various countries that occupy the AUKUS arrangement.
And I think just to add to a point, Liz made a great point earlier where she talked about the communication and the political will, right? And this is the thing that, if we talk about what is the greatest risk to AUKUS in Australia, it's not the Trump administration. It is Australia and our way of viewing that we can't possibly do it, and therefore we're not mobilising the national base to support it. It's certainly not a Department of Defence problem in any way, shape or form. Yes, partly it causes them lots of problems, but it is a national problem, and if it falls under that, because we didn't mobilise industry, we didn't mobilise academia to support it, not because the ASA didn't do their job, quite frankly.
Let me throw that back on all three of you as a final question. What if AUKUS fails? What are the consequences for Australia if AUKUS fails?
Both pillars 1 and 2 fail, or just one?
The whole thing.
You're at liberty to interpret that in your answer, Sean.
Yeah, look, and I think there's two elements of it. The first one, if AUKUS does fail in terms of Pillar 1, then Australia finds itself with a significant capability gap. Now, it's likely we will have a capability gap anyway, but this would be a very significant one. But as Euan points out, we have established a submarine force, I think it's 3 times in Australia. We have done that before. But I think more broadly, the biggest concern for Australia is if AUKUS fails, what it says about Australia's willingness to get behind our national security requirements in our most significant strategic circumstances, and what it says about our relationship with the country that we consider our largest ally. And we'd have to ask ourselves, how safe really are we in this region with China's increased aggression and allowing that to fail? And this goes back to my point. I think that we spent a lot of time relitigating whether AUKUS was or was not the right decision. We are past that point of a country. Now we need to make sure that we can keep that on track, and we are acknowledging the risks and we are managing those risks. That's where our intellectual capital should be right now.
Sean?
Yeah, I don't think we'll fail. So I'll just put it out there. I can just tell you that we, the United States, are confronting the lack of shipbuilding capability that we have, and we're trying to do everything we possibly can to not only rise to the challenge of AUKUS Pillar 1, but also to build out a more robust Navy. And yes, there will be autonomous craft that we'll leverage in a matrixed way of having exquisite systems work with attritable systems. But yeah, I'm pretty sanguine on Pillar 1. I'm even more sanguine on Pillar 2 because that's one that requires less government involvement. When you look at what SpaceX has been able to do in the span of 20 plus years, they've made United Launch Alliance, no offense to Boeing or Lockheed, almost irrelevant, right? There was no requirement to recapture a Falcon 9 rocket. They just did it because of business reasons. It actually made sense. And I think the more we're comfortable allowing the private sector to do these types of capabilities or develop these types of capabilities, the more Pillar 2 will become a reality. And believe it or not, you can actually carve out a place for an NVIDIA and Microsoft and Amazon to work on Pillar 1 with regards to using these as nodes of a much larger mesh network, right? If we think about things as software first, then build the hardware platform that's optimized around that, I think there's a lot of great things that we can do.
It's an interesting and hopeful thought. Taking the shackles off of industry is the key to delivery on Pillar 2. Liz, final thoughts from
AUKUS
you.
failure. Doesn't have to fail, and I don't want it to fail. But unless we're going to inject some accountability into AUKUS, and I'm talking here about almost KPIs, right? For people who are personally responsible for delivering aspects by X date, the number as well, like finite, inescapable detail. And I know, I'm not sure how the public service feels about accountability in that space, but I don't see how it really matters at the end of the day whether or not it fails, in the sense that the vision is undoubtedly going to change. So what is deemed a success in 2 decades' time might not necessarily marry up to the original intent of AUKUS. I think it's a problem, and something missing from the AUKUS discussion writ large, and we've just done it again here as a panel, is we're not talking about the sustainability of this effort. Not in climate, in ongoing, what we build and generations after that.
I want to pick up on the sustainability piece of things. So the father of the modern nuclear navy is Hyman Rickover, right? Hyman Rickover was in that job for 40 plus years. So if we are serious about this, I think our respective government should figure out who is going to be our respective Hyman Rickovers and put that person with that vested authority and provide that continuity across the space.
Yeah.
Because as my comments earlier, the 3 signatory heads are no longer there. From a government standpoint, industry is going to keep iterating, so we need to have somebody that sort of serves as that intermediary between both halves of the equation that actually can provide the continuity that we need. So,
great final thought. Thank you to all 3 panelists. Can I just ask you to please to remain in your seats? We go to a break next, but before that, I'd like to invite Dave Rowe just to come back on stage to brief us on what's coming next.